the address that they say. It says join us at, and this is where, and then it comes here, and then I touch this, and you get this. So I don't know if it's going to happen here. I assume so.
Starting.
This is Facebook. This is JPL, Isolation and Connection.
You are live. You can start.
Good evening, bonsoir, and shalom to our viewers, and welcome to the Jewish Public Library's English programming events. My name is Trudis Goldsmith-Reber, and I'm a co-chair of the English Cultural Program Committee. Today's program is directed by Roxana Browns, the Jewish Public Library's Director of Programming, and we are extremely lucky and grateful to her and our technical specialist, Eddie Stone, to get us all connected. Hopefully everything will work out fine. Today we have added to our Open Books series an unusual but very necessary and much needed talk. It brings us into the midst of the Corona crisis with a very special guest. Today's guest is Dr. Gerald Wiviott, and he will address the topic isolation and connection in the time of COVID-19. If you do have questions related to the topic for Dr. Wiviott, we will collect them and he will be more than happy to answer them at the end of his talk. But before I shall ask him to take over and speak about this troublesome topic, I shall mention just a few highlights of his CV. Dr. Wiviott was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was educated in Washington, majoring in philosophy at the University of Wisconsin. He attended medical school at NYU and received his MD in 1967. And after that, he came to McGill University's medical school and he received his diploma in psychiatry in 1975. And then the US Army called him for military service. He served as battalion surgeon from 1970 to 1971 in Vietnam. Returning to Montreal and McGill after that, he became the staff psychiatrist at the Allen Memorial Institute from 1975 until present. He is an associate professor at the McGill Department of Psychiatry from 2005 to the present, and he received multiple Best Teacher awards from medical students and from his psychiatry residents. I personally got to know Dr. Wiviott in a one-time famous Montreal fencing hall in Westmount, where he fenced under the well-known and skilled fencing master, Maître Stephen Vamos. In 1973, Jerry was the Canadian foil champion, and in 1976, he was the Olympic team captain. In 2013 and 2014, he became the age group champion in New York Grand Fondo cycling events. After the talk, we might have received questions, and if time allows, Dr. Wiviott may want to answer them. But now we are ready to listen to him, and his topic is, again, isolation and connection in the time of COVID-19. I'm happy you are here, Jerry, and we are looking so much forward to what you have to say to us. Welcome.
Well, thank you. And Trudis, thank you for that introduction. You brought back memories, which are wonderful. And one of the memories is the connection that I felt towards the fencing club, towards you, and that part of my life, how important connections are. Okay, now let's get to the topic at hand. Welcome to all COVID-19 confined Zoomers. We are living In strange and unsettling times, COVID-19 is ubiquitous presence, invisible to our eyes, yet mentally lurking as we distance away from other bodies, and when we fitfully sleep as it invades our dreams. You would not be surprised to learn that in my work these days, the social upheaval caused by COVID-19 has had major psychological ramifications. To illustrate some of the issues that I see in my office, I would like to share with you a recent first session, a Zoom assessment that I had with a patient, a 50-year-old fellow, Mr. Demick. I recorded the session and transcribed it so I could share it with you in detail. So I begin. Hello, Mr. Demick. Tell me, what is your full name? My name is Pan Demick, but you can call me Pan. Okay, Pan, how can I help you today? Oh, Dr. Wiviott, I'm so happy to see you even on Zoom. Actually, I'd be happy to see anybody. I'm going crazy staying home, having food delivered, wiping down the mail, watching TV morning till after midnight. I used to be an active person, going to the gym, restaurants a few nights a week, running a business that I built up over the last 20 years. Now the business is closed and it might not reopen anytime soon. Online Pilates doesn't replace the Y. I can't see my kids who live across town. And I worry that if my prostate acts up, I won't be able to see my doctor. I'm gaining weight because all I do is eat chips while watching The Last Dance and wishing that I were as cool as Michael Jordan. This is not the life I want to live, and I don't know when this shutdown might end. Why Michael Jordan? When I was young and on a basketball team, I wanted to be Michael Jordan. I find myself thinking about the past, high school, college, girlfriends, sex. I think I want to go back to a time when all kinds of things were possible. I was free, full of hope. I had a future. Now I wonder what life is all about. Pan, did anyone tell you that I'm an existential therapist? What the hell does that mean? Well, I'm glad you came to see me because you're going through an existential crisis. According to one of the giants of existential therapy, Irwin Yalom, the foundation of psychological health for any person rests on how they deal with 4 key challenges. 1, isolation. 2, freedom and responsibility. 3, meaning versus meaninglessness. And 4, mortality. Well, I get isolation. That's what I'm living. I can't see a friend, not even my daughter who lives on the other side of town. I can't go out. I get it. But the other stuff doesn't apply. You told me that you've had to close your business, a project that you built up over 20 years. I imagine that you took pride in your work. You might even have felt that it was part of your identity. And it certainly provided your life with meaning. Call it significance, call it a role. It allowed you to feel when you woke up in the morning that you had a calling. I imagine that part of your despair is caused by feeling that your life is meaningless. Perhaps that explains your preoccupation with memory. Going back to a time when your youthful self was full of hope and every day was a meaningful adventure. To fantasize about making jump shots like Michael Jordan is a great way to feel confident and alive. I would encourage you to look around and to see what opportunities you have at hand. Hobbies, books, favorite music, paper to use for journaling, a charity to support, and people with whom to connect. But we'll get to that later. Okay, so maybe I have to think about finding something meaningful to do, but the other stuff you mentioned, I don't get it. What's that thing about freedom and responsibility? People are always choosing, making choices, whether or not they're aware of it. Not choosing is actually making a choice, at least from an existential point of view. If we assume that humans have free will, we have to hold them accountable for the choices they make. You made a choice to open a business. I don't imagine that you were coerced into doing that. And you're now choosing to eat chips while watching TV. Ah, you say, I have no choice. Everything is shut down. I can't go out. That attitude, the sense that you're no longer in control of your choices of your life, is another brick in the wall of your despair. I would love to help you realize that even in the most desperate times, there's room to feel a degree of control. Imagine a condemned man slowly walking to the gallows with 2 guards at his side. He can still choose the attitude that he takes towards the guards, towards the hangman, and even facing his own death. Ironically, recognize that your feeling of despair is a choice might make you feel less helpless and your fate less hopeless. Pan, you are a man, not a leaf in the wind. But I'm alone. Well, not exactly. I live with my wife, but we know each other so well that there's nothing to talk about. She's upstairs with her plants, and I'm down in the basement with the TV. Sometimes I fall asleep and don't even bother to come upstairs until I shower in the morning. I don't usually shower since I'm not going to see anyone. Pan, you're describing isolation. There are 2 kinds of isolation. One is like solitary confinement, nowhere to go, no one to see or talk to, few activities to alert the mind. Yes, many elderly people quarantined in nursing homes, separated from family, are in that position. Worse than isolation, the pain of confinement can be unbearable. But that's not your kind of isolation. Yours is existential. The feeling of being on a mountaintop and realizing that the world around you is so vast, millions of light years vast, and you are so small as if no connection were possible, alone in an uncaring and unaware universe. And the remarkable thing about that feeling is that one can feel it even in a crowd. Despite how common these feelings are, often we feel awkward revealing that that is what we're experiencing. But when everyone is forced to isolate, what previously was barely conscious becomes an overwhelming reality, a sometimes terrifying reality. What COVID has laid bare is the psychological experience of isolation. Even a theoretically close connection, 24/7 with the spouse, can exacerbate the pain of isolation if it feels that you are living with a stranger. Okay, so I feel alone, even when my wife and I are always together. There's nothing I can do about it. Pan, let me give you something to think about. Irwin Yalom, who I previously mentioned, has written many books, including the textbook on existential psychotherapy. In it, he wrote about isolation as if it were a given, a fundamental reality of the human condition that we all have to live with. In fact, it is so painful that people often choose destructive behaviors, like drugs, to ease the anguish of isolation. In extreme cases, it can lead to suicide. Pan, you watch the news. Look at all those people risking their lives by ignoring social distance. And as soon as communities open up, they congregate in clubs, on beaches, and at political rallies, as if they were desperate to escape the terror of isolation. While examining the emotional toll of isolation, Yalom seemed to leave the topic without providing much hope. However, in 2001, he was awarded the Oscar Pfister Prize for his outstanding contribution to the combined fields of psychiatry and religion. In his acceptance speech, he emphasized the human need for connection. As an example of where we turn for connection, he argues that religion provides community, social bonds, connection to people who share similar rituals, similar values, communal participation, and most important, a sense of belonging, and maybe even a sense of identity. Forget it. After my bar mitzvah, I never set foot in the synagogue. Everybody reading the same book, chanting unintelligible ancient prayers, praying to an invisible, all-powerful God. I never felt I belonged. This Yalom guy sounds like a rabbi. I need data, evidence, proof that isolation causes anxiety and messes you up. Otherwise, all this talk is just religion dressed up as philosophy. If I told you that your brain was hardwired to connect to other people, would that convince you that isolation could lead at the very least to being messed up, to feeling like crap? We call it dysphoria. It would be like feeling hungry if you hadn't had food for a while. Your brain in isolation is starving for contact. You're making that up, but I am getting hungry. For years, cognitive scientists have been looking at empathy, the capacity for someone to put himself in the shoes of another. It's the sense of entering the mental space of someone else, their inscape. Another psychiatrist, Heinz Kohut, described empathy as vicarious introspection. Vicarious introspection, a two-stage process. Imagine watching a movie and feeling the sadness of one of the actors. It's their sadness, but the feeling is created in you. You become aware of those feelings, and by almost instantaneous introspection, you're aware of feeling the sadness of the on-screen actor. I don't watch those kind of movies. It's not just sadness that brings out empathy. Why did the human brain develop this capacity? Think of early human evolution, when the rapid awareness of another human's intention could save your life. If you sensed harmlessness, you might let your guard down and get to know the stranger. If you sensed menace, you would flee. Those who could best sense what the stranger had in mind would most likely survive, and that ability would be passed on to future generations. Between 600,000 and 700,000 years ago, the skulls of our hominid ancestors enlarged, allowing greater brain size. The neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex thought, is the part of the brain that grew the most. And with that evolution came the capacity for pair bonding, nurturing children, group interaction, collective problem solving, and rituals to deal with everything from birth to death. What I'm describing is the evolution of the social brain. The research of anthropologist Robin Dunbar found that among mammals, the strongest predictor of brain size, specifically the size of its neocortex, is the size of the social group. We have big brains in order to socialize. What does that have to do with IQ? I always got good grades, but everyone said I could do better in school if I didn't spend so much time with my friends and teammates. But I loved being with people. Maybe my social brain was too big. Yeah, I can see, Pan, you are quite a social guy. When times were good, the way they were until 4 months ago, your big social brain served you well. All those connections help make you who you are today. All of us have brains that are programmed to need connection. This is where Yalom's existential philosophical insights meet experiments in the laboratory. A prominent neuroscientist, Matthew Lieberman, using techniques to track brain activity, discovered the resting brain shows exactly the kind of neural circuits that are involved in social thinking or making sense of other people and ourselves. He found that whenever it has a free moment, the human brain has an automatic reflex to go social. Lieberman's work sheds light on isolation also. He discovered that social rejection is processed by the brain in the same way that the brain reacts to physical pain. Social pain signals that we are all alone, that we are vulnerable, and need to either form new connections or rekindle old ones to protect ourselves against the many threats that are out there. Holy cow, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's why I sent emails to relatives I hadn't heard from for years. And I've heard from old colleagues who sent out group emails as if they were trying to reestablish contact with the gang. I should have reached out to them. We're all in the same boat. I don't want to worry you, Pan, but sociobiologist E.O. Wilson put it this way, quote, to be kept in solitude is to be kept in pain and put on the road to madness. A person's membership in his group, his tribe, is a large part of his identity, unquote. You can see why this pandemic is having such a profound effect on people. The vulnerability that we all feel has made people even more aware of their need for connection. It's part a need for protection, part a sense of identity, and part our brain telling us that it too needs to be stimulated. We work out our body in our basement gyms to keep our muscles active. We also need to consider another part of ourselves, our brains, the part that's hardwired to connect with other people. Yes, Pan, you should have reached out to people who are trying to connect with you. It's not too late. Sorry. Bye. People are reaching out to me. Sorry about that. Dr. W, you talked about vulnerability, but I don't feel vulnerable. I live in a nice house. My wife and I are healthy. I think my business will survive, though I know it will take time. And my kids are doing well. Each has a partner, and they're working towards good careers. In fact, I trust them so much that I gave them the passwords to my bank account, my stock portfolio, and the names of my accountant and financial advisor. I'm not worried about them. Mr. Demick, it's nice that you have kids that you can trust, but tell me why now, after so many years, have you decided to share that very private information with your kids? Well, if anything happens to me, but you just told me that you don't feel vulnerable. Well, not to isolation, but let me think about it. All this talk about social distancing, wearing masks, frequent hand washing, no treatment, death toll mounting daily, first wave, second wave, it does fill me with a kind of fear. I always think about it like the fear of going outside or standing too close to someone who's sick or being on a ventilator. And my mother lives in Florida. I can't even watch the news. Pan, it sounds to me like you're afraid of dying. You're 50 years old. Have you ever before thought about your mortality? Well, once when I was in my 20s, I had a car accident and I was taken to a hospital with a concussion. I saw someone in the emergency room next to me and the doctors were working hard to keep that person alive. That was terrifying, but I didn't think that I would die. When my father died, I thought he was old and sick and it was his time. But I never thought about my death until now that you're making me think about it. And I have to confess, I don't want to think about it, Doc. I feel chilled. Is the window open? No window, but your chill tells me that you are uncomfortable, maybe even afraid. That fear is the theme of a book by Ernst Becker, The Denial of Death. Remember early in our conversation today, I mentioned Yalom? I said that he emphasizes that along with meaning, freedom, and isolation, accepting one's mortality is one of the cornerstones of psychological health. You, like most people, are reluctant to face the fact of your mortality. This pandemic has forced people to stare directly at the finitude of their lives. In his book, Staring at the Sun, Yalom looks at our struggle to acknowledge the reality of our mortality. That's so hard. I always believed I'd be so old one day that I wouldn't care if I died. Now I feel it could come at any time. Not knowing when scares the hell out of me. Oh, excuse me, Doc. I should have said heck. No, you don't have to apologize. It's true that you don't know when the grim reaper will come your way. And that's another way in which this pandemic has affected all of us. It's the uncertainty of it that magnifies the terror. We humans don't do well with uncertainty. We need to feel in control. And the uncertainty about how long we have to live is hard to wrap our heads around. except now it's a concern that we can't avoid thinking about because we all feel vulnerable. It was wise for you to give passwords to your kids. It acknowledges that you are aware at some subconscious level, this virus has forced you to confront your mortality. Doc, I came to see you because I was feeling anxious, but now I'm feeling terrified. Maybe I should ask you something. How are you dealing with isolation, uncertainty, and your mortality? It's not an easy question to answer because I'm not sure that I'm dealing well with all the issues, and the way I deal may not be appropriate for you. Let me start with uncertainty. I like to think of uncertainty as the usual state because I'm rarely certain. Therefore, uncertainty offers opportunities to be creative, to try to find ways of feeling in control where it's possible, like having routines, perhaps writing in a journal, checking out a new series on Netflix, daily physical exercise, and regularly venturing outside for fresh air while keeping social distance. More specifically, I take time to listen to jazz music, where improvisation plays with uncertainty, creating a new art form. With time, uncertainty may become more bearable and less threatening as it becomes the norm. People, after all, are quite resilient. Wait a second, you lost me with that jazz music stuff. To me, it's all noise. I want to be able to hum the tune. But I sort of see your point. I do need to get back to jogging and working out in my basement gym. What about isolation? Zoom for me has been a lifeline. Look at how we're connecting now. Before, I used the phrase reaching out. Yes, be not afraid to reach out to family, friends, colleagues. It's likely that they too would like to be the recipients of your reach. You can use the old-fashioned telephone, email, text, Skype. All these marvels of technology have come to serve a necessary purpose. Okay, that's easy. When I leave here, I'm going to call an old buddy. But Doc, you're afraid of dying, right? Dealing with mortality is a more difficult and personal issue to address. I found comfort in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's book, Love in the Time of Cholera. By the way, the title of this talk derives from the title of Marquez's book. I don't want to give away the plot or waste time describing the unforgettable characters, but I want to share with you what I got out of the book. In page after page, cholera, like COVID-19, is a constant presence. And that presence makes people aware of their vulnerability, with death as a constant presence. And what does Marquez do with that psychological state? He uses it to highlight the importance of relationships, particularly the importance of love as a way of finding comfort while confronting mortality. The varieties of love are shown in the various relationships the characters develop. Mr. Demick, you may believe that you and I share the same idea when we talk about love, but think about it. Are we talking about erotic love, romantic love, lust, loyalty and committed love, codependent love, selfish love, altruistic love, intimate love? Of course, different forms of love can coexist, but they each convey a different set of desires, expectations, and feeling states. They all, however, imply a connection between people, and that's the point Marquez is making. Confronting mortality puts into perspective the importance of connection to help heal the anguish. In our own time, dying alone is one of the tragic images that comes to mind as we see our loved ones in a hospital bed or behind a window in an old age home. Using cholera as a metaphor for the inevitability of death, Marquez sees love as salvation. Pan, you mentioned that you are married and that you and your wife know each other so well that there's no need to talk. Yeah, we're together 24/7. We're not fighting. I heard that spousal abuse complaints are going up during this period, and I read that divorces are becoming much more common. I guess we're lucky. Yes, from that point of view, you are lucky, but you did say at the beginning that you are stressed and anxious. I would suggest that you are not allowing the relationship with your wife to offer comfort because it isn't as deep a connection as it might be. You, and maybe she, are afraid of intimacy. Stephen Mitchell, a psychoanalyst who wrote a book called Can Love Last? A book that explores the reasons people avoid intimacy. It can be perceived as dangerous. It requires courage and trust because to achieve intimacy, one has to feel that they're transparent, willing to be known by the other, willing to tolerate the complete openness of the other. Usually couples, and I'm talking about you, Pan, collude with each other, pretending that they're known, and partners comply by not questioning, exploring, and being curious about the deeper parts of their spouse's psyche. While that kind of pretending might feel comfortable, it is not conducive to maintaining a degree of passion, excitement, and intimacy, the three strands in the knot of connection: passion, excitement, intimacy. When the relationship is then stressed by 24/7 togetherness, it's harder to pretend. Add to that the psychological toll of isolation from the outside world, and there's even more reason to wish that yours was a relationship grounded in intimacy. Unfortunately for you, up until now, the healing connection to an intimate other has not been found. In some ways, you and your wife are strangers. Is it too late for me to change that? I kind of wish that my wife were here now so I could hold her. That reminds me of the ending of Marquez's book. Two people who reconnect with each other late in life are on a cruise ship, the only passengers. They ask the captain to fly a flag which indicates to people on shore that passengers on this ship have cholera. That guarantees that they'll not be disturbed as the ship sails metaphorically into that final sunset, death. Think about your relationship with your wife as a journey, which you and she are taking together, knowing that whatever time is left, you can control how you want to spend it. What can you do to make it better for both of you? What can you do to make the relationship have meaning for you? What would it take for you to feel that your actions, which you know might require courage, are helping both of you tolerate better the deprivations and anxieties that are inevitable during this time? Mr. Pandemic, that's something to think about, but our time is running out. Anything you want to say before we stop? Can you give me one thing that I can work on that might make me feel better quickly? Think about gratitude. Whether it's family, money, health, or life, I hope you can get in touch with gratitude for the life that you are living. Grateful that you share a space with your spouse? Let her know it. Grateful that you have money? Spend it wisely and decide how you can best share your wealth. Grateful that you're alive? Don't take it for granted. Stay safe, but allow yourself opportunities to savor life in whatever ways may appeal to you. By the way, you might want to check out the synagogue website. Maybe now you'll be ready to belong. Sounds like you're giving me a challenge. Doc, somehow I don't feel as helpless as I did when I first started talking to you. I hope we can meet again and keep up this connection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to
I'm not hearing you, Trudis.
Unmute.
No,
No, not.
now I hear you. No,
You can hear me now.
now I
Yeah,
can.
very, very good. So I thank you very, very much, but you left us, of course, in that short time with so many questions. I don't even know where to start. I marked down on little snippets of paper all kind of things. The one which stuck with me, and I mean, there will be most likely comments, and we will hear from them via Eddie Stone. But for me to start off with it, I mean, you quoted writers, famous names like Irvin Yalom, who had been at the Jewish Public Library too, to speak. But when you talked about the isolation and the pain of confinement, the social pain, being unable to connect with the outside world, at one point there came the sentence, "We are all in the same boat." The couple living together, knowing each other like this gentleman for 25 years, having a good, prosperous relationship, but relearning it because of COVID-19, or have to relearn it. There is a big difference between the couple living together for a long time, knowing each other, and the single person living alone, and the topic of thinking of mortality. You mentioned also the images we all have seen, the seniors' home, where family could not visit, could only stay outside and wave to the windows, or even the ones, when we think of mortality and isolation, the ones which were already in the hospitals and which were dying, and which those who were unable to see anyone of their family members for a goodbye. There is a big difference between that. I find being alone and not having the connection and not being able to have a connection, like, for example, there may be the case where you are alone and yes, you have children, but they are living far away. They can't see you. They are living in another country. They can't come to you. You can't come to them. You know the fact that you will be alone from now on. Having the choice to do something with the time which is giving to you, even though you are alone, that person is not in the same boat as the couple, knowing each other, sharing the time, having shared the time for 25 years, like the one you quoted often, of this gentleman. There is a big difference between the two existences. And I find then living alone without connections, it makes you think even more about mortality and death. And making choices to inform your family in writing, via Zoom, whatever. I find the pain is so much, and the wish also not to be there. Like for me, the frightening fact was to see these pictures of people in the hospital being turned around again and again with no, I mean, only with the human touch of nurses and doctors being at their side. But just seeing that made me, for example, want to live and not get into that situation at all. But we are not all in the same boat. There's a big difference between that couple being together, I find, and the person who is totally alone and probably even wanting to die. How do you deal with that as a psychiatrist? They probably don't even come to you. They probably just want to go because they don't know when that is going to end, that COVID-19. There is no end to that, no end to when will I be able to see my children. The only thing you can do is clear your records so that they know where to find things when the end comes. But a choice to do something else but that is very limited, I find. Don't you think?
Okay, let me be clear about something. I can talk about groups of people, and look. I can talk about people who are alone. I can talk about people who are in a hospital as patients. I can talk about people who are carousing on a beach. They're groups. But I also know that fundamentally we're all individuals, and to generalize is really risky. And I don't mean to imply that the people who are part of a group must be like everyone else. Everyone is different. I know, for instance, people who are alone, who are not at all aware or feeling that they're alone because they're connected by phone, by it's more difficult now, no doubt. These are people who would meet friends for coffee, meet friends for a walk, a morning walk together, and they are not living the kind of isolation that I talked about early on when I talked about this physical isolation. They're with people. But even people who are with people from an existential point of view, many people have this sense of being alone. Sometimes it comes out as no one understands me, or I don't feel like I can be close to anyone. That even when people are together, let me just give a little bit of a story. There was a woman a very bright woman who spoke at a conference maybe 10 years ago. And she was an angry woman, I have to say. And she talked about feminism in a way that made all the men in the audience uncomfortable. But I had to respect her. She was really bright. And a couple of years later, she spoke at the same conference. And I really had to wonder whether I was going to go subject myself to her diatribe against masculinity and patriarchy and all of the other stuff that she talked about before. But I went to hear her. And this time, she got up on the stage, and she was a different person. And she said, I want to talk to you about something personal. This is in front of 200 or 300 people. She said, many of you know me, I'm married. I had a child who's now 1.5 years old. But my husband and I realized that there was no connection for us. And I went to him and I said, I think we should explore the possibility of getting a divorce, or at least separating. And around that time, somebody gave her a book. And the book is one that I mentioned in my lecture called Can Love Last? Can Love Last? And she mentioned that book, and she said that book, sorry.
No, that's all right.
That book changed my life. It changed my life because it told her that, yes, she did not know her husband, and he didn't know her, because they colluded with the idea that they knew each other very well. Therefore, they didn't really risk uncovering things, uncovering personal things, uncovering desires that they kept hidden before. And she said that book changed our lives. And now my husband and I have rekindled a love relationship because we're now together. So what I would say is that many people are like she was in her marriage. Yes, they're together, but they're really feeling alone because they feel that no one really knows them and they don't want to be known. Mm-hmm. So just the fact that there are people around doesn't protect someone from the isolation. But the reason that I'm bringing this up now is that the COVID phenomena has forced us to confront what it's like to feel alone. Mm-hmm. What is it like to feel that our normal connections, our normal sources of human contact we're deprived of them. And we're being forced to think about isolation in a different way. And I'll say one more point, then I do want to stop. You also mentioned that, yes, seeing people on TV, on ventilators, in a hospital, sedated and knowing that there's a very good chance that they're going to die, those of us who are watching on TV are also confronting our mortality when we see that.
Yeah.
It's not hidden anymore. It's not in the funeral homes or the cemeteries. It's on our TVs.
Yeah.
And all of us feel this sense of vulnerability, which we may not have felt before.
Yeah, no, that is true. In fact, again and again, when I must say I've been very careful with washing, with really following all the rules and regulations. But when there is a moment of frailty and perhaps not watching that carefully, I immediately, that image comes up of intubation and these people there, so that it actually is an image of mortality, of the reaper, really, the worst kind of image, which hits me, that I say, oh no, you better watch, you better don't go out, you better don't join that garden party yet, let's wait with it. I mean, these are images which have taken on a new meaning, I find. Another thing you mentioned, and perhaps after that we may get some chat questions and comments from Eddie. You said that the uncertainty of our existence, because we don't know when it ends, we do not know what we touch, what we carry with us, what we might be inflicted with. The uncertainty forces us to venture out into things we have not considered, or they were buried, or they were there latent, there, dormant too, but suddenly they become part of our life. There have been things which I always wanted to do, and I never had time for it. It's not the usual postponement thing. It's this inner feeling, I really want to learn that. I really would like to venture into that absolutely new field, which was never part of my life, which I've never done. Like one of my friends said, I hated cooking, but now I've become the best cook in the world because I'm so alone. And I started making things because I want to live. I want to survive. I'm living alone. I'm 85 years old, but I want to learn to cook. So she started all kind of new things. And I find that that is also one of the issues you mentioned, that we do have a choice to fill that loneliness with perhaps something which is hidden and covered and never came out. And then you also mentioned another aspect, if I may say that, the couple. The couple has rediscovered each other. And you mentioned all kind of loves. And in the face of mortality, to appreciate that other in your life, husband, friend, whatever it is. And you spoke about the various alternatives about love, erotic, romantic, selfish, and so on. I started rereading some of our classical writers, you know, just Goethe, for example, in order to understand it, because you never give much thought to that. You never do give, you coexist because you have been for so long, you appreciate each other, you think you love each other, but all the dimensions which you were talking about, they don't come out. And perhaps that last example of the woman where they freed themselves and gave a bit of their self away or open themselves to the partner makes a completely new relationship. This is also, COVID might have caused that, you know, that you commit yourself in a different way.
You know what? If people have discovered each other because of 24/7 and they like what they found, that's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
It's a risky thing. It takes courage.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing is, I want to mention it because it seemed to be superfluous, but it came up repeatedly in your talk. That is the role of religion. I mean, in a world where religion in certain ways has become meaningless as a practice, incorporated in your daily life and lifestyle, I think the need to to question a higher order and power and go back to the scriptures, whether it's the Torah or the Old or New Testament, it doesn't really matter. I think the community of people to be together and pray together and find a social meaning, just being together and praying to their God, whatever it is, their power, nature, whatever it is. I think that it may be a revival in religious practice too. I'm not sure, but certainly in the group of people I know, there has been the wish to reconnect and share interpretation of whether it's the Torah or whether it's the Old or New Testament, you know, to share this wish and celebrate it also. That I find that's a very important issue. I don't know if you can say more about that, or if you have more among your practice, if you have more experience with that issue, because this is something affecting most of us in very different ways.
Oh, I think religion, you know, so many varieties, but for many people, it gives meaning to their lives.
Mm-hmm.
In the context that I was using religion, I was thinking more of it as a community to belong, a source of identity and togetherness. And at a time like this, when we're feeling this, we're atomized, we're separate. We need to feel that we're part of something.
Yeah.
And just to say we're part of humanity is too vague. But to be part of a community makes it much more secure and much more comfortable. And religion serves that purpose. It doesn't have to be religion. It could be politics, being part of a political party. It could be, you know, belonging to the Jewish Public Library. And
Exactly.
part of the group.
Yeah. That I find this is really, really very important issue, that to join a community, whether it is a community of readers, and a weird thing has happened to me, something which I never thought I would be doing, but actually join a community of knitters, people who sit together and knit and make beautiful craft things, which I thought I will never do. I thought there were much more important things to do in my life, but it has become an outlet for creation at the same on very, very simple issues. But there's also another question from Eddie here, which I would like to read. Barbara is asking, how do you deal with someone who flat out says they wish to go to sleep and never wake up due to loneliness and depression, exasperated by the pandemic isolation? That's a question for you. How do you deal with someone who flat out says they wish to go to sleep and never wake up due to loneliness and depression, exasperated by the pandemic isolation?
Okay, I'm going to give you a very personal answer. Because the hypothesis is that that person has actually come to see me and has said that to me, and therefore I have to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to offer them a relationship with me, because that's what therapy is, after all.
Yeah.
And I'm a therapist.
Yeah.
So I would like to offer them a relationship, and in the context of that relationship, explore some of the things that make life interesting for them, that did in the past, maybe not now, but in the past made life interesting. Explore fantasies that they might have about where they would like to be. If they don't die, if you don't kill yourself, where do you want to be in 5 years?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But it has to be in the context of a relationship. It's not writing a prescription and giving somebody a pill.
No. But are you seeing patients again? Can one connect with the famous Glenn website, where you have to wait endlessly before one even gets to see someone or gets a referral to someone?
Yeah, the administrative thing I just can't go into. Personally, yes, I see people. I see people on Zoom. I'm going to the hospital, not as often as I did before, but I'm trying to keep up the role that I've played in people's lives, because they're important to me also.
Yeah. Okay. There is another question, or again, Edith has asked, what is the impact of isolation on the person living alone? I mean, it is a question. You have addressed it, but perhaps you can, again, it came in as a commentary. What is the impact of isolation on the person living alone?
See, I can't generalize.
No.
I can't imagine, you know, a group of people. I can imagine that somebody experiences their isolation in a poor me attitude. Poor me, I'm all alone. Well, I would like to challenge that attitude.
Okay.
I would like to challenge it and try to get away from sort of the masochistic way of seeing life as being cruel and unfair, and seeing whether there's some possibility of developing an interest either with other people or with ideas and books, because connection can come in all forms. Being alone is just a horrible. I know it's a horrible feeling. But there are all kinds of ways of relieving the aloneness. One can do it through books. One can do it, you know, through joining organizations.
Mhm. There was something else about the existential crisis dualities, like freedom and the responsibility. You mentioned the attitude of someone being led to the gallows, and that in that short walk from hopelessness, helplessness, life and death, that the attitude of that person going out to that final moment, it brought me to the thoughts of one of our classical writers, Schiller, who also had said, kein Mensch muss müssen, that is, you have the choice to address the state you are in with the freedom of choosing to feel free, even though you may be bound. But that is something which has to be learned. You know that you are helpless, you are being led out. You may still see until you get covered, your eyes will be covered. And you know that in 5 minutes you will not be there anymore. But then the attitude from that very alive, vivid moment to the darkness which will follow, that has to be learned. Instead of screaming, forcing yourself not to go, not to want to die, and so on. How do you train yourself? I mean, it's a training. We have to learn. COVID-19 seems to put us in a training school to rethink many things, not just to exist, coexist with someone or exist alone, to reach out, to become responsible, to become free, even though you're unfree, to become meaningful in a time of meaninglessness and mortality. How can you train yourself? I'm sorry to repeat that question. How
Well, I don't know whether people can, you know, can train themselves. Frank, one of my favorite, you know, journalists is Frank Bruni. And a couple of weeks ago, he had an article, and in that article, he talked about the fact that there are three forces over which we have no control. One is the family that we're born into.
Yeah.
The other is our biology. By biology, he means our aptitudes, our strengths, our IQ, the way our brain works. We don't have control over how our brain works. And we don't have control over fate. We don't have control over living during the time of pandemic, living during a hurricane. We don't have control over certain things. But outside of those things, we need to feel that we do have control. We need to consider ourselves agents of our destiny. And once we wallow in self-pity because we feel we're trapped, we have no control, then we become helpless and hopeless. And those are signs of depression.
Okay.
How can one train themselves out of it? No, I don't know whether that can happen. But certainly, a helping person ought to try to reinforce the possibility that there is room for agency, there is room for control.
Mhm. Yeah. I know that we are coming to the end of our hour, but one last, one question again is how much place how much importance would you give to the element of hope? Because hope is an enormous force, which is also given to us when it comes to challenges, where we have to accept and turn these challenges around. And the force of hope is actually the only one which makes us perhaps address that time where we have only questions and question marks and no end to our questions.
Okay, I'm not going to give you a satisfactory answer, I'm afraid. I think that hope in the service of optimism is good. Hope in place of agency is a handicap. If hope is hope from some external outside savior, then hope takes away the possibility of somebody feeling in control of their own lives.
Okay. Okay, you gave us a lot of questions to take home. The dialogue between your patient and you was very helpful, at least for me, I'm sure for many of our viewers. The fact that you are there and that you cannot give us a prescription to heal immediately, but an ear which will listen and perhaps suggestions how to move on, because we are still not at the end of that road. We are still hearing every day, there are new cases, there are new deaths. Worldwide, I've just read this morning the Neue Zürcher, the Swiss newspaper, that there are very serious challenges there. So it's all over. So I'm very grateful. I will think about many questions. I couldn't write them all down, but I thank you for having joined us with your insight.